Hey everybody, it's G Marks and welcome to another episode of Biz Books, where I speak to great authors about the great business related books or business books that they have written. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I'm speaking with Gary Rivlin. Gary has written a new book, which is right up my alley because it's about small business. It's called Saving Main Street, Small Business in the Time of COVID-19. Gary, first of all, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yes, spoiler alert, everyone, as well. For those of you guys either listening to this or watching it, I'm actually mentioned in this book as well. I know Gary and I had a conversation about my thoughts on COVID. So thanks for including me, but that is in no way the reason why I'm including this book in Biz Books. It's a great book. Gary, first of all, let's start out telling you a little bit about yourself and how you came to write the book.
Right. So I've been a journalist for a lot of decades. I've kind of done a little bit of everything. I've written books as a magazine. I'm a magazine writer. I worked for the New York Times for a while. I covered Silicon Valley. I guess I wrote about a different version of small businesses with the aim of becoming giant businesses worth billions of dollars. And I've kind of jumped around subject wise: tech, racial politics, gambling, whatever is interesting. Here is very personal. My father was a small business operator his whole adult life, so I had a firsthand view of how hard it is, how hard it is in normal times, and that's kind of what gave rise to this book. It's just like, recessions, competitors, bad breaks. There's all these things that small business operators are confronting, but now they have a pandemic. Now they have a shutdown order from a governor saying you can't operate the way you usually operate. And it's like, wow, how are they going to survive this? So that's where this one was born.
And it's funny too about the book because it's not so much, my takeaway from this book, Gary, is that it wasn't so much of a business book as it is a mystery. It's like you feature a handful of small businesses, which we'll jump into in a minute in this book, and how they pretty much survived COVID. And as you and I are talking about, right now, it's November of 2022. So yeah, COVID is mostly behind us, but people are still trying to figure out what happened. Mm-hmm. And I think, your book is just that. I almost feel like you're going to have like a sequel to this book that you'll write like 2 years from now,
Huh. Well, it's also interesting. It's, the narrative, the storyline is these business owners are hit with COVID.
Right.
But really, it's about the bigger challenge that every one of these business owners is a survivor. I mean, if you're open for any length of time, you stare down some, if not all, of the internet, big box stores, chains, globalization. There's these huge sweeping trends that make it harder with each passing year. So in a way, COVID was just the latest. And the good news is you've now survived, so you can continue battling the big chains and private equity backed, efforts that, are trying to crush you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's talk about the main players in this book. Okay. So let's start with TJ Cusimano. Tell us a little bit about TJ.
So TJ, he's the kind of kid, he's the kind of guy who everyone knew he would end up a chef. And, when he was in third grade, he was cooking meals for his friends. So he thought about other things, but all his friends said, no, you're gonna have your own restaurant. And in his mid-20s, in fact, he and his wife Nina, they met at a restaurant, of course, opened Cusimano's in Old Forge, Pennsylvania. Old Forge is right outside of Scranton. And the truth is, the first few years it was really, really hard. A restaurant is a hard business to make it in. And so they struggled the first few years. Sometimes they couldn't take any salaries. Nina was a waitress, so they lived off her tips, basically. But finally, in the year or two before COVID, they had reached a really good rhythm and things were really looking up. But then, boom, they're in Pennsylvania, and the governor said no indoor dining for about 3 months. And then, once they reopened, it was 50% occupancy for a week or two or a few weeks, and then it went back to 25%.
Yeah.
He didn't even bother. And so what was amazing about TJ was creativity. Just the way he pivoted. Again, I covered Silicon Valley. I covered these entrepreneurs, and they're all held up for good reason for being nimble.
Yeah.
He's just a nimble entrepreneur. First thing he did, okay, we're shut down. We have all these perishables. I need money. The town needs food. and he just had, a few people helped him, bagged up vegetables, flour, put his sauces into containers, and had an open air market on his back porch of his restaurant. Brought in much needed cash, and helped folks who didn't want to go to a grocery store, needed the flour, whatever it was. And then he just tried everything. So they're high end Italian. So they don't really lend themselves to takeout, right? It's not pizza and pasta. It's a higher end Italian cooking. And so he tried Taco Tuesdays, big hit, especially the governor in Pennsylvania allowed them to sell alcohol to go.
Right.
So they did good business in margaritas as well. He was never particularly cared personally for barbecue, but watched YouTube videos and how to do Southern style barbecue, found a used smoker online. And, by May of 2020, every weekend was having barbecues and made thousands and thousands of dollars each weekend on, barbecued chicken, barbecued ribs, and sides. Not everything was successful. They tried meal kits like Blue Apron. And that was a total bust. It turns out that anyone paying restaurant prices doesn't want to have to both cook the meal and then clean up after the meal. But that was TJ Cusimano. It's just like he just tried a little bit of everything, and what worked he ran with, what didn't he moved on.
You featured TJ and a couple other few other business in Pennsylvania. You mentioned Governor Wolf. This do not want this to be a political conversation, but you studied these businesses, and you also did some analysis of businesses nationwide through COVID. What is looking back on all of this, Gary? What are your thoughts on the lockdowns and the mandates that were required for businesses? And I ask that because, like I said, when we first started talking, we're still sorting through the data. You have people arguing like they were effective and necessary. You have other people saying they completely were a waste. Look at Florida, you know what I mean, compared to, New York. You dug into this pretty deeply. What was your takeaway on mandates and lockdowns?
So, I do want to say that this was very important to me. I want diversity in every sense of that word. So type of business, male, female, race, age, but also politically. So a couple of the larger characters in the book are diehard Trump.
Yeah.
So I was hearing a range of views where, thank goodness they're closing us down. The governor, Democrat in Pennsylvania, was closing us down to protesters. Very angry. They're being shut down. There are a few really big mistakes that I hope we'll learn from. One was in Pennsylvania, and many states. It was hardly just Pennsylvania. I mean, I should also say virtually every state, early on shut down non-essential businesses. Florida, Georgia, Texas. Some of those that famously opened up faster. They did initially. A shutdown. I do think while we were figuring this out, the hospitals were overwhelmed, or there was a fear that hospitals would be overwhelmed, like they were in New York City, where I'm based. But mistake number one was many governors, including Governor Tom Wolf in Pennsylvania, shut down non-essential retail, yet allowed big box stores like the Walmarts and Targets and Lowe's to remain open. And that was just a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Even these small businesses that never have more than 2 or 3 customers at a time anyway, they could easily socially distance. They could have made, it could have been by appointment only. The idea that there was this black and white, you need to shut down and it's against the rules, the health laws, to allow anyone in your establishment was overboard. Because then what happened is everyone needed things, whatever it was, the hardware or food, so everyone piled in and congregated. There are hundreds and hundreds of people at the Walmart.
Yeah.
And
the opposite effect, right?
the opposite effect. The good news is, so remember, there was a surge in the fall of 2020. Actually, the death rates and the COVID rates were higher in the fall of 2020 than in the spring. Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, as did other governors, re-implemented shutdowns. This time, he did in fact shut down indoor dining and beauty salons, yoga studios, those kind of things, but not retail.
Right.
I think the lesson was learned there that it made no sense. You made the problem worse. And by the way, you're giving a leg up to the giants and hurting the small business guy.
Sure. Sure.
You know, I personally think, our system is generally rigged in favor of the bigger players against the smaller players. The last thing we should be doing is coming up with a policy that means the big get bigger and the small have a harder time surviving.
Yeah, I had oh God, I gotta tell you, Gary. So like both in January of 2020, January 21, my wife and I went down to Florida for the month. We Airbnb'd it for a month because we were able to do that working remotely. And it was like we entered it's like we landed on a different planet. We both, we live in Center City, Philadelphia. So as bad as the state of Pennsylvania was with, mandates and lockdowns, Philadelphia was even worse. And I'll never forget, it was January of 2020 two, actually. It was this past January that we went down to Florida, and there was still mandates not only for as far as wearing masks, but the restaurants themselves were not allowed to serve anybody in the city of Philadelphia unless they were vaccinated. They had to show proof of vaccination. And once you get outside of Philly, as you probably know, I mean, there are a lot of people that just chose for whatever reason not to get vaccinated. And unfortunately, that basically meant that, restaurants had to turn around a huge amount of business, turn away because, of these mandates. And it turned out that a lot of them were, unnecessary. So I hope you're right. I hope the lessons learned people can take away. Do you also feel like, and again, this is, I really do feel like our political leaders are trying to do their best. It's a new thing. You know what I mean? And I don't know if you felt the same way as well. Like I don't believe that whole narrative of they want to control the people, and they're trying to keep people safe, but I don't know. In the heat of the moment, sometimes they just did not make the best decisions.
I agree. And to use Governor Wolf, happens to be your governor, and
yeah,
the governor at the center of my
yeah.
it's like very smart fellow.
Yep. By the way, a business owner as well, and a very nice guy. You know what I mean? Like, he comes with business background.
But a kind of this arrogance that I think helps explain, Trump,
Yeah.
Trump and Trump's support, that I know better and I'm not going to really listen to anyone. He got roundly criticized by Democrats, Republicans, didn't make a difference because it was just, I'm going to talk to the health experts and my 3 or 4 advisors locked in a room, and I'm not going to go out and talk to small retailers. I'm not going to talk. It took many weeks before the Restaurant Association of Pennsylvania could have a single discussion. And like about half the states in the country use this method of 50% occupancy, just kind of a arguably random number.
Right.
You can have half the people, where other states, and I think this is much more sensible, said, well, just can you make sure tables are 6 feet apart?
Right.
That was the standard. And some restaurants are really, really small and intimate. Some restaurants are really, really big. And so Cusimano's in Pennsylvania, and in the book, he easily could have had more than 50% occupancy, with people being 6 feet or more away. But
right.
That was the rules. It was rigid, and beyond that, I think it was also not listening. The problem was not listening to actually restaurants saying like, well, we care too. We don't want people getting sick. We don't want to get sick. We have staff. If our staff gets sick, we have to close down. Can you just trust us a little bit here?
All right, let's talk about some more of the characters in the book, because the stories that this book is all about stories, and their stories tell the story of what happened during the pandemic. So Vilma Hernandez, tell us about her.
So Vilma was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, moved to the United States when she was 18. And, she had her own hair salon when she was in the Dominican Republic at 16 or 17. We all talk about in this country, like, oh, small business is the heart of America. It's like, folks, small businesses are the heart, pretty much the center of every nation. In fact,
more so in other nations than America in some cases, right?
Right. They don't have big chains in the Dominican Republic. They don't have,
Walmart
giants. So there's in a way more entrepreneurialism. So she came here, and when she first got it, didn't speak the language. When she's a citizen now, but she worked for other salons, But like happened with a lot of New Yorkers after September 11th, it was kind of a breaking point, let's say, like, something, let's try life somewhere else. She had 3 kids. They're in a small apartment in the Bronx. Her husband worked for a delivering beverages, and they moved to Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a sweet city of about 30,000. Used to be a kind of a glorious city.
Yeah. Coal country.
Coal country.
Yeah.
Coal country. Coal dried up in the 70s, went through struggles. It's now kind of half white, half Latino. And, she fulfilled her dream of having her own hair salon, opening around 2002, right in the center of Hazleton on their Main Street, Broad Street. And, first few years, a real struggle, of course. It's hard to start a new business. But by the time of COVID, it's amazing. This woman had 8 employees. I mean, it was really, really killing it.
Yeah.
But, what happens with COVID? It shut her down completely. There wasn't outdoor dining, it wasn't delivery. It shut her down completely. And she was relieved. I mean, there was a kind of a funny, the book opens this way. There was this funny period in mid-March of 2020 where your business was closing down without any governor having to tell you, because customers didn't want to come.
Yes, that's right.
She didn't want to be like leaning into, it's very intimate. You're having your haircut. Someone's leaning into your face. Someone's leaning into your face, typically, the shampoo bowl. And so she was relieved when she was shut down. But it also meant for a few months, she brought in zero money. Again, how would she survive this? But, I mentioned creativity with TJ, grit, determination, fortitude. A small business, I'm biased, right? As my dad, is a small business guy. I'm an independent, arguably I'm a small business person, though I don't really consider myself.
Yep.
Okay. Some do.
No, freelancers are small businesses, no different than anybody else, right? I mean, you get 1099s, you follow Schedule C, maybe a subchapter S, but you are a business owner. It's just you. That's your business.
Exactly. But so, she made it work. Whatever, TJ Cusimano, Vilma Hernandez, all the folks.
Yeah.
They're not prominent in the book, but in Scranton, a gay couple, they put their life savings into buying and refurbishing a pair of old glorious buildings. Scranton too was a glorious city in its day, coal country. And there it was a popular wedding venue. Both were popular wedding venues, and like with a hair salon, that pretty much went from 100% finance
zero.
It went to zero.
Right.
And one in the couple donned a red vest and worked as a clerk at a Lowe's, and the other went to work for a grocery chain, fulfilling online orders. I mean, both of them were members of the Chamber of Commerce. One led the group Scranton Tomorrow, I think it's called. They were civic leaders. And, here they were working, kind of blue collar working class kind of jobs to make it work.
Sure.
And by the way, happy ending, right? Now they're booked all the time, right? I mean, everyone's catching up to their weddings and their 50th birthday parties, I guess their 51st birthday.
Yep.
And stuff. And so, but they had to survive long enough to survive.
How about Vilma? What did she do?
We should bring in PPP again.
I was gonna. What I wanted to do is after I just introduced some of the characters here, and we can I wanted to then sort of dive into some of the government programs to get your thoughts on the good, the bad, and the ugly of those.
But with Vilma, it was government really saved her. She had no money. I mean, her husband had a job. Her husband had health insurance.
Sure.
She had kind of low expenses. I mean, everyone was, laid off, obviously, unemployed. So they're receiving unemployment.
Right.
And so her expenses.
Expanded unemployment too, by the way. But go ahead. Expanded unemployment, right?
Right. I mean, right. Of course, the extra $600 a week.
Sure.
And so, but government programs really, helped her business survive.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. Sometimes I talk about and write about inflation, and yes, there is a big part of inflation that we're going through right now is a fiscal monetary mismanagement. But when COVID hit, I mean, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I feel like the Federal Reserve and the Treasury stepped up. They realized that what killed banks in the Depression was a lack of liquidity, so they provided that liquidity. And, they also provided PPP and economic injury disaster loans and expanded unemployment because they realized people, that's what governments are for. And yeah, that contributed to an enormous increase in the circulation of money in our money supply, the M2. But it was something that really needed to be done, and it saved people like Vilma and so many other business owners. Do you agree, or do you not
No,
agree?
I do. It amounted to about $5 trillion all in, if
Yep.
you include the programs under both Presidents Trump and Biden.
Yep.
I thought Powell did a really excellent job at the Federal Reserve.
And Mnuchin, I thought, did a
And
good job.
you took the words out of my mouth.
Yep.
I am not a fan of Donald Trump or Steve Mnuchin, but I thought he really stepped up. I
Great.
mean, that's the thing about a crisis. A previous book I wrote was about Hurricane Katrina, and I noticed that in a crisis, some people step up, they become bigger, and some people shrink. And I thought Mnuchin really stepped up. I mean, the good news is he's not an ideologue. He can negotiate with Nancy Pelosi. He can negotiate with Chuck Schumer, and he made things happen because, like, he's a deal maker. He was a Wall Street business deal maker, and it's not who won or who lost. It's like, let's reach a deal so we could all be somewhat happy, even if we're disappointed by certain things. I thought Mnuchin did a real good job that year.
And it's funny, I know we're jumping around. I was going to wait to get into it, but we can talk about PPP a little bit now, because you talk about people stepping up. I mean, the Paycheck Protection Program, the genesis of that was Senator Rubio, down in Florida. And, he was a key member of the Senate Small Business Committee. They actually had some of that legislation like pre-written, not for obviously COVID, because they couldn't see it in advance. I interviewed him like a few months ago, and he told me that they were pretty far along in the legislation to help companies that were having problems doing business overseas. And but they all joined in together. I mean, you talk about bipartisanship, like you said with Mnuchin and Secretary Powell or Fed Chairman Powell. The entire small business committee, the small business entrepreneurship committee of the Senate, they jumped in and polished off PPP with all of its good, bad, and ugly, but they got it done and moved it forward because they knew how important it was.
And the House too. I mean, the House Republicans,
the House
Democrats on the small business committee work together. I have such mixed feelings about PPP. I feel like I could write an entire book on everything that was wrong with it. But I mean, starting with like, you didn't have to have a problem to get it. There was nothing saying like, there was this vague language that current economic conditions, like, well, yeah, like no one could come to the office, people working remotely. It's adding uncertainty.
Yep.
The uncertainty, if you could just claim uncertainty, well, everyone could claim uncertainty. I sitting at home, my kids, whatever.
Of course.
And so that was a big mistake. The idea of per physical location, which is how all these, PF Chang's, publicly traded, or in that case, I think private equity finance giants got money. So there were mistakes, but people criticize like, oh, wait, there weren't the checks and balances. Are you kidding me? That money had to get out yesterday.
Yes.
And so I thought Mnuchin and the Republicans and Democrats who were behind PPP were right. Yes, there will be people who will steal money. We're not putting the checks and balances in because we need to get the money out there. I grew up with the 2% rule is the way I learned it. Like, if 98% of the people are doing it honestly and 2% are ripping it off, like, okay, let's go after that 2%. But that's a really good program. That money had to get out. It had to get out fast. And I thought that was the right decision.
Rubio told me what the biggest mistake that he made was that they significantly underestimated the number of business owners who were unbanked. They didn't have banking accounts, or they just had a personal checking account. It wasn't an account for their business. And as you know, PPP had to go out through banks. That's how it was distributed. And what shocked me the most, and he admitted that it was just a mistake, is that he's a senator from Florida, which has a huge, a population of Hispanic and Latino business owners who are known for not trusting, institutions, and are known for doing business on a cash basis and putting money under their mattress. So you would have thought that like Rubio, out of anybody, coming from Florida, would have been like, hey, we need to have something in this PPP that can get the money out there to these business owners, even if they don't have a bank account. And his response was, yeah, it was a mistake. Lessons learned. It's just they're gonna have to remember that for the future. Do you think that PPP and the Paycheck Protection Program can is a model for future relief for business owners? I mean, hopefully never a pandemic, but something of the sort or something needed.
Yeah, the thing that confused me is that I mean this changed over time, but initially I think it was 75% of the grant had to be spent on salaries.
Yeah.
Like we have unemployment. TJ actually makes this point in the book that like, well, why don't you just let us figure out like, okay, I'm in New York City, rents are preposterous. Why can't I use PPP to keep my restaurant open? Keep paying the rent. I mean, it's money into the economy. I have to pay my supplier. A restaurant cannot continue if it's not paying. I didn't understand, why there was such strict rules. They loosened it. It went from 75% had to be over, I think, 8 weeks or 10 weeks. I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
And then it became 60% over a multi-month period. And that made more sense to me. The idea was to help these businesses survive and also get money circulating in the economy. And I think you could have done that without making it the Paycheck Protection Program.
I agree with you completely. I also think that it would probably work better if it was the government made the money available, distributed it to the states on some type of formula, and then you let the states figure out how their constituents, what would make sense. I mean, if you if you have you're in a state that's more agriculture based, say you're in Idaho, maybe more PPP related funds can be put towards fertilizer and feed and, other, material costs of running an ag business versus if you're a business that's in New York City where, like you said, rents are the big cost as well. So it might be more of a local decision. But again,
based on need.
And getting back to your earlier point, though, I mean, look, they had to get the money out. So they didn't really have time to think of all that in advance. So I'm just hoping that we can, people can walk away, learn from it and have something to use it as a model in the future. And the need part of it is exactly right. I mean, anybody that applied got it. And even now, the people that are going after the SBA and the Department of Justice that's going after fraud, they're just going after the big cases. And I can't tell you how many countless clients I've had in my firm that got 50 grand, 100 grand, 150 grand. They're way under the radar screen of of the SBA, and I know that they didn't need the money. I mean, it wasn't there was just a windfall.
Right.
Lessons learned. How about give me your thoughts on the economic injury disaster loan program from the SBA? Did you find many of the people that you interviewed in this book? And I do want to ask you about Glenda and the Maloney clan. But before we do, what are your thoughts on the IDLs?
Well, I mean, let's keep in mind, IDLE has been around for decades. In fact, I first learned about it covering New Orleans.
Katrina.
Probably,
yeah.
It's a real lifeline. Though I remember that this is kind of a humorous anecdote, at least humorous to me, that so I was covering Katrina for the New York Times. I call up the SBA because I'm writing about small businesses. So that was a story I wrote. And I wanted to get a comment because there was a lot of frustration that all these small businesses that clearly had a need, like they were flooded, they were destroyed, waiting on their IDLE application. It's supposed to be a emergency kind of loan,
Sure.
And I call and I leave a message. And like, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks later, my cell phone rings. And it's the SBA. Excuse me, I ran that story a month and a half ago.
Your government at work.
but I remember thinking that, wait a second, this was a large region, right? The Gulf Coast, but a fraction of the country. IDLE was just absolutely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so it's a great program. And then, the Congress is trying to deal with it. And instead of 150,000 maximum loan, we're going to, 15,000, 10,000 maximum. And
then they start offering grants as well as part of it, just for applying, you would get a grant from the SBA. And then you got additional grants if you're a minority owned business or you're in a highly, a low income area. I mean, they really muddled the water, right? And the SBA isn't exactly the most efficient agency in the history of government either.
well, that's why Senator Rubio, I do believe it was his idea, to have the banks distribute the money because he saw what was happening with Idle. They're already overwhelmed on this one program.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna have millions and millions and millions of applications for PPP. They did have millions of applications for PPP, but you know, for Idle loan, it meant everything to TJ Cusimano and his wife Nina behind Cusimano's. It's just like they were really struggling. Like they had survived that first 6 or 7 months, but like they had no reserves, and they're heading into the winter of 2020, 2021. And like, what's going to happen? Are people going to do indoor dining? You know, we can't have people on the back porch. They rented a tent. No one's going to want to be in a tent in Pennsylvania in January.
Right.
You know, how is going to survive? And he, I think very wisely, I think it was about 50 grand, maybe 40,000, got an Idle loan. And for him, it was peace of mind. It was security. It was a cushion.
Yeah.
And all, and like, you know, to him, it's like, paying whatever I think it's a 30-year loan, paying it back $250 a month was like nothing.
Yeah.
Just that was well worth that 250 whatever it is a month was well worth the cost for the peace of mind he got.
Yeah, it's a 30-year fixed loan. It was like 3.75% interest, and over 30 years, you get $100,000 loan. You're right. It's like a few $100 a month to pay it back. It's like nothing. So it did provide that added relief. Okay, Glenda Shoemaker, tell us about her non-life sustaining gift and card shop.
So she's in a rural area, the
Yes.
town of Tacanic, around 1,700 residents in a very sparsely populated county. And you know, so her mother and her mother's partner started J&R's Hallmark store in the 1970s, and for a while we're just killing it, right? People buy cards.
In Taconic, Pennsylvania, they're like running a card store and killing it.
Card and gifts, and you know, people come from now. There wasn't much else, so you know.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I by killing it mean making a very nice living.
Yeah.
You know, enough to sock away some money, vacations, work 5 or 6 days a week, and have it. You know, Glenda's mother had been like a legal secretary. She gave herself a raise and got independence. That's what I mean by killing it. It's kind of the small business version of killing it.
It's
fine. Working and I'm surviving the year.
Right.
And so, but then, you know, Glenda took over in around the mid 2000s, and you know, she starts, and you know, there's subprime meltdown. So there's a recession, and she's up against every trend, right? People are buying less greeting cards with each passing year, and that's half her store is greeting cards.
Yeah,
her customer base is aging out. Let's put it that way.
Right.
You know, and there's a Walmart on the edge of town, and they're selling at very low prices some of the actual inventory she has. They're basically selling at the same price she gets through a wholesaler and all. And you know, she's kind of like hanging on by a thread when COVID hit. Honestly, when I first met her, I was scared, like, I don't think she's gonna last, but grit, fortitude. I mean, she's exhausted. She works 7 days a week. And she keeps that store open. And, you know, for her, some of it is, and this is so typical, I believe, of small business operators. I don't want to say ego, because that is a negative way. The sense of self. Yeah. Like, I'm a small business operator. I'm a proprietor. She's on the city council in Tacanic. You know, I am a business leader. If this goes under, then who am I? I feel for her, it's almost existential, you know, that she's fighting to keep her small business, her mother's legacy, you know, the town's main street. I mean, she's on the main street in Tacanic. And, you know, the way she puts it, I'm fighting for small towns. I mean, what was happening in Tacanic was happening in small towns across the country, you know, that businesses that have been struggling when COVID hit. In fact, to me, it's the business equivalent of having pre-existing health conditions. You know, if you had heart conditions, you know, lung problems heading into COVID, you were much more likely to get severely sick, if not pass away. The same with businesses. If you had pre-existing economic conditions, which she did, I mean, she to me had the equivalent of business-wise of, you know, kind of lung, heart, etc., and obesity. You know, going on. but I'm going to give it away. She survives.
It's funny how recessions sometimes can have a Darwinism effect on a lot of businesses. When times are good, you walk around the streets of my neighborhood, there's a dozen nail shops, and then a recession hits and all of a sudden there's like three left. She was an interesting character only because of her independence, and she was vocal. And you're right, she was very, very proud of her business and active in the town. So to her, the business, her business was all about, her life. That was her livelihood, and that was her represented to her. How did you find her? Like, what the hell are you doing in Taconic, Pennsylvania?
Well, I mean, obviously there's many small businesses in my life and outside my window here in New York City, but I really wanted someplace away from the coast.
Right.
I wanted there kind of be a universality, and so, New York is its own strange.
It is.
So I Philadelphia too, I'd put in that same category. And so it's, northeastern Pennsylvania. I mean, early on, I could drive to it. That was a big consideration with COVID. I didn't have to worry about flying and being shut down. That way. And I went to the local chambers of commerce. There's some of the unsung heroes here. The local chambers of commerce, the SBDCs, the small business development centers, which, to me, so they offer consultants free to small businesses. And to me, it's like evening up the playing field a little bit.
Yep.
The giants have their marketing directors and their finance people and all that and stuff. And so I just kind of went to them and said, hey, what are some interesting businesses? Glenda was the most reluctant of all the business owners.
Right.
I had, and in a way, she was the best for a writer because she wore her fears on her sleeve. She spoke about resentments and anger. She felt very alone. In fact, I kind of feel like I was almost her, her therapist.
Sure.
She felt so alone. How am I going to survive this? Her mother's in her mid 80s, didn't want to burden her with her woes around the store and stuff. And so I would come like, I don't have time to talk. And, 2 hours later, we're still talking,
So you traveled all around. You're in Pennsylvania, you're in Scranton, you were Hazleton, you're in Taconic, Pennsylvania, but you did feature a business in the Bronx, the Maloney brothers, who Sol Cacao. Am I pronouncing their business right? A chocolate maker.
Sol Cacao.
Cacao. Okay. Tell me a little bit about them.
So, I really, my father for most of his adult life was a manufacturer, a maker. And so to me, I couldn't really, it's called Saving Main Street, which implies retailers, restaurants. But to me, I couldn't really write about small businesses without talking about manufacturing. That's a big piece of the small business sector. And then it seemed less important to choose a place away from New York City. And these are the three Black siblings, born in Trinidad, grew up in Brooklyn, but have Sol Cacao in the Bronx. And, they were about 5 years into the business when COVID hit, and they were still kind of building. Most of their sales came from going to, farmers markets and festivals and doing in-store sampling. They're in a few Whole Foods here, but they're mainly here in New York. But, they're mainly in specialty stores, which were shut down by COVID. They couldn't do their in-store sampling during COVID, the height of COVID. There's no festivals, anything like that. And so I was amazed. They thought they were doomed. I thought, wow, how are they going to survive this? But again, something about small business operators, something about entrepreneurs, they pivoted. 90% of their sales when COVID hit were retail.
Right.
And within a year, 50% was direct sales through their website. They kind of went
online.
Really amped up. And much of the rest was corporate sales. You had all these corporations that want to thank their workers for, essential workers for putting up and putting in all the effort.
Corporations that want to show their support for small businesses as well, right? And what a perfect small business to support, a minority-owned business in the Bronx, struggling manufacturer that makes great chocolate, right?
Yeah. No, it happens to be really great. They taught themselves, but their grandfather, their great grandfather from in Trinidad. They had they were cacao farmers, and they kind of going back to their roots. That their dream was to kind of own a cacao farm, but like, wait, we need a lot of money to buy a farm, but if we could use the beans and make chocolate bars, and you look at them now, and so they built up this corporate business.
Yeah.
They have a robust direct to consumer business. Meanwhile, retail's come back. Meanwhile, retailers are hearing about them. Retailers are want to support Black-owned businesses, and so now they have both working. So
Right.
because of COVID, they're that much stronger because they have the corporate sales, they have the direct sales, and they're back to doing retail. And so, it's like kind of the point you were making about the recession. Like, it's Darwin. They had the fortitude. They're now stronger today because they survived COVID.
So there are a myriad of other characters, and we're running out of time here. And for those of you guys listening or watching us, I mean, it is a book about small businesses during COVID. Small businesses representing more than half of the people employed in this country, more than half of the GDP in this country as well. And there are other characters besides the businesses that you featured, Gary. I mean, we talked about Tom Wolfe. There was Jeff Kuzat, the mayor of Hazleton. John Longstreet, Joseph Lech, a corner pharmacist, all different people that came, in and out of this book that had different stories to tell. I have two questions for you just to wrap things up. So what I saw during COVID was, my clients were mostly B2B. We have about 600 clients in my firm, and they're mostly in the Mid-Atlantic area at family-owned businesses, industrial parks, corporate centers, that kind of thing. A great many of them did great during COVID. I mean, it was like some of their best years ever. They sold online. Maybe they were shut down for a little bit. A lot of them finagled their way into the essential business, definition, and were never questioned about it. And they carried on, and there were a lot of businesses that really did well. So, I'm wondering, is that another book? I mean, because you talked about businesses that were really hit with challenges and pivoted and survived, but I believe there's a whole other population, a demographic of small businesses that prospered during COVID, and I'm wondering if you gave any thoughts to writing about them.
I did not. I guess I read about underdogs. I like folks that are kind of hit hard and have to overcome. But I do agree with you. I mean, maybe this is a part of the untold story, is that some businesses really profited. I mean, I don't mean because they sold, kind of COVID tests.
No.
I mean that, they PPP kind of helped pay their payroll.
Yep.
For a while they were fully operational. And in fact, I found Cusamanos through this woman. She's active in the National Federation of Independent Businesses, in Northeastern Pennsylvania. And I was kind of doing my auditions, like, well, this business makes sense. And I realized I talked to her, this pool supply company. Oh, and I realized talking to her, like, she had her best year in. Yep. Her business has been around 20, 30 years, I forget. It was her best year ever, by far. I mean, by far. And so, but fortunately, she said, but I do have an Italian restaurant I love in Old Forge, Pennsylvania. And that's how I found Cusamanos.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, they're, contractors, people in the construction business, home repair business, they were crushing it because people were stuck at home. And that's what they were doing. And then, of course, realtors, because people were buying homes. And then, of course, there was, anybody involved in e-commerce, and some restaurants really, at least in the city, like where I'm in Philly, I've talked to, restaurant owners around here that said, like, we're going to cut down our lease and just do more takeout because it's just more profitable for us. We don't have to worry about employees. And people walked away, with some good lessons, which brings me to my last question. So TJ, Vilma, Glenda, Dominic, Nicholas, and Daniel, at the Maloney Brothers. I mean, they're all still in business, right? I mean, as far as they're all still around.
I'm absolutely certain. I've been in touch with all of them the last couple of weeks. It's like, to me, that is the great untold story.
Right. Tell me
of COVID. Like, there's something. I am the media, right? I have the New York Times. I look at my resume, and it's. We do a really good job of telling you all the bad things that can happen, but then we move on. There wasn't the great small business die-off that we were worried about. When I started this project, I feared, they're talking about 25% of small businesses going under, 33%, 40% of independent restaurants are going to go under. It's hard to tell. Well, people listening probably know well. small businesses are always going out of business. The Fed did a fascinating study, I think, and they found like in a typical year, about 8.5% of small businesses shutter, go out of business.
Yep.
In 2020, 11.5% of the businesses closed. Now, there's a lot of sadness. I lost a couple of favorite small businesses in my life. I'm sure that's true a lot. If you go to college towns, they were hurt hard, right? I mean, all these students were in their childhood bedrooms, not in the dorm.
Or businesses in downtown centers. You know, workers weren't coming into the office. You know,
right? And so there was businesses really hurt, but there wasn't the economic carnage that we were warned about.
Why not? Why not? I guess that's my question. And I'm not expecting you to have.
I have the answer.
Okay, tell me the answer. Why not? Why is it when I walk around, Philadelphia right now, when I drive around in the suburbs, I was talking about that with my wife just the other day, and I cover small business. I mean, like I write about a small business. I look around, I'm like, you would never know a pandemic happened. I mean, there's no more empty stores than there was back in 2019. And, all the restaurants still seem to be around, and all the business, you just wouldn't know it. Why not?
Well, so by the way, at the University of California, Santa Cruz, there's a study saying there are more small businesses today than there were in 2019. Well,
certainly more startups, that's for sure. 10 million of them over 2020 and 2021.
Entrepreneurship is really up. It's great.
Yeah.
We've been talking about all of it, like the creativity, the ability to pivot of small businesses, the fortitude, the grit of small businesses, and something you rarely hear, but government worked. I mean, it was inefficient. We could critique it, but between EIDL and PPP, that's $1 trillion. They threw $1 trillion. The U.S. government threw $1 trillion at small businesses, and it's amazing what $1 trillion could do. And on top of that, stimulus dollars. Lots of folks got extra money in their pocket. Childcare money.
Yep.
Is kind of a check from the U.S. government.
Don't forget the restaurant revitalization fund. They help out restaurants. The arts funding. I forget the name of that. That helping out theaters and businesses in the arts world. I mean, there's a lot of support given by the government. And as we sit here today, like things still seem to be working. You know what I mean? The government didn't collapse. You know what I mean? Like the money was there. It almost makes you think, with all the argument over like healthcare. Remember that back in like 2010, like it's going to cost $1 trillion to pay. You think to yourself, like, I don't know, why does the government clearly they were able to spend, $5 trillion and rescue the economy, and things are still moving on right now. It almost makes you re-question what more money the government could be spending, and what real impact it would have on the world,
Well, that's not happening anytime.
No.
Okay. I get your point, but
you would need another pandemic to get that going. Gary Rivlin is the author of Saving Main Street: Small Business in the Time of COVID-19. Like I said at the beginning, it's not a business book per se. It's a mystery, and Gary provides answers to the mystery of how did small businesses make it through a pandemic, a worldwide unprecedented economic catastrophe. The answers are in his book. Gary, it was just a great read, and I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I want to wish you the best of success with the book.
Thank you so much, Gene.
Everybody, you've been watching and listening to BizBooks. My name is Gene Marks. Join us again in 2 weeks. I'll be back with another author with another great business book like Gary's book about small business. Hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we will see you again soon. Take care.